All right, so welcome everybody to the theory week of Political Science 501, Introduction to the Graduate Study of Politics. This week we have Dr. Richard Gilman-Opalsky. Tell us something about your early upbringing. Where were you born and what was life like there?
All right. Well, I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And so that is about 60 minutes north of New York City, where a lot of my family lived. So it's pretty small. I mean, it's a city, Bridgeport, but frequent trips to New York. It's a question, early upbringing. Well, I was in a uh, uh, my family is kind of a lower middle class family. My parents never went to university. I was kind of a space alien. Going into academia, my mother and father were quite perplexed by why I would do that. They didn't understand it. My mother, she was born in Russia, came to the United States at the age of 15 by way of Poland. My father was born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I was raised in a non-religious Jewish family, as is the case for many Jews in North America. Um, and I got into music and philosophy and politics pretty young. And I'm still into all of those things. I don't know, is that enough, or do you normally have? I don't know what normally people do.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of questions, so and you could always welcome to say that you've already covered something. Um, So tell us something about the politics, society, and culture of the place of when you were growing up.
Well, I mean, a lot of it was I was I spent a lot of time around um, just my family politically pretty apolitical, I would say. My I have early memories of my father watching a Rush Limbaugh television show and screaming at the television screen. He would, and I didn't know what he was so angry about, but I was kind of drawn to that. What are you yelling about? Um, the politics, it wasn't really too much by way of politics. I got into politics. I think a lot of it had to do with just questioning a lot of the things that I was given, as a young person, and feeling like this can't be it. My father was a very anxious, precarious guy. He was always afraid of being fired. There was always we were always on the precipice of some, financial anxiety. And so I think for me, thinking about um, escape routes came pretty early. I don't know, really. In terms of the culture, I found culture in music, music and art, which I'm still very intimately connected with, um, and that's evolved over time. But um, I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Um, when did you know that political science was a path for you, and who was most important in your decision to pursue graduate school?
Well, um, see, I did not. I wasn't really thinking about political science at all, to be honest. I was interested in philosophy. Um, when I went to college as an undergraduate student, I was drawn to philosophy. But of course, deciding to be a philosopher is like deciding to be a poet or a jazz musician or something. I mean, it's really not. There's no security, or there's really not a lot of reward in that. So I graduated and had terrible jobs, really bad jobs for quite a long time. And fortunately, my partner, Robin, who I'm still with, I've been with her for well more than half of my life. She saw how miserable I was, and she told me that she was not going to talk to me until I applied to grad school. It was like, you have to, you're not happy, you're miserable. Don't call me. I would call her up and she'd say, have you sent in an application? And I would say no. And she'd just hang up the phone on me. And I loved her and still do. And I wanted to talk to her. So I sent in applications. I went to the New School for Social Research in Manhattan for philosophy. And I was going to stay in philosophy. But then I started to learn about the job market for people who do philosophy in North America. And it is sort of like political science, but even worse, far worse. I mean, it's just a catastrophic. And there are a lot of universities that don't even have philosophy departments. And many universities in North America have philosophy departments with 2 or 3 people in them. And fortunately for me, at the New School for Social Research, all of the social sciences were oriented around theory. So if you went into anthropology, you would be reading Michel Foucault. If you went into sociology, you'd be reading Michel Foucault. If you went into political science, you'd be reading Michel Foucault. And economics, you'd be reading, yeah, Foucault. You'd be reading Foucault in economics. So everybody was a philosopher there. And I got some good advice. It was like, well, if you switch your major to political science, you can do political philosophy here. And instead of having, no jobs to apply to, you'll have about 3 that you could apply to. And that was a step in the right direction. And it turns out that it worked. And here I am talking to all of you.
Excellent. Please describe some of the courses you teach, especially ones that'll be available to graduate students over the next 2 years.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I teach, all my courses are in social theory and political philosophy. That's my training, that's my research. Um, when I went from the master's in philosophy to the PhD in political science, I remained in the field of political philosophy at the New School. So if you take a course with me, it will be the courses that I teach here, they are thematic for graduate students. They're thematic courses. I teach one course you could take is course I'm teaching now, Democratization in the Public Sphere. That's theories of democracy, democratic theory, and theories of the public sphere. I also teach a course called Postmodern Theory, Politics and Possibility, which is sort of a Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, and beyond type of class, continental European critical theory. Really provocative class. It may not sound like it from the title, but it's a really fun class to teach because every single week we throw into question something else that you take for granted or took for granted until that session. And it's provocative and exciting. I have a course that I teach every other fall called Marxist Philosophy, Past, Present, and Future. We start with Kant and Hegel, and then we move through the major works of Marx. And then we deal with a lot of the post-Marxist theory on up to the present. I have a course that I'm teaching in the spring, which is for graduate students only. It's called From Margin to Center, Women in Political Theory. And that is, instead of having, 4 or 5 women on the syllabus, that's an entire class that is dedicated to a very diverse range of women from the margins of philosophy. And it's a lot of fun because every week is totally different because women don't only talk about one thing. They talk about everything and a lot of things that only they talk about. So it's a really fun journey. And then I have another class, which some of you are in, the graduate seminar in political philosophy. And I'm teaching that one right now. And the others are all undergraduate classes, so I won't mention those.
All right. How would you describe your teaching style and teaching philosophy?
Well, that's a good question because I had one teaching style and one teaching philosophy, and now I have one for asynchronous online classes, and I have the old one. So I mean, the old teaching philosophy that I had is um, as a jazz man, I call it a jazz pedagogy. I introduce the content in a kind of lecture style a component, and then it's open collective improvisation. It's like the head collective improvisation, and we usually let collective improvisation take it to the finish. And the collective improvisation is, we just talk about everything in the assigned reading in whatever direction we want to go. But I usually, set the stage by introducing some of the biographical, historical, and philosophical context of the reading. And that also sometimes makes it, I find, for students more endearing. Because I teach a lot of books that when students read them, they want to burn them um, just out of frustration, and maybe they need kindling. But, you know, uh, but once you learn a little bit about what the author is up to, where they come from, what were their experiences, I find that that makes the material more endearing and inviting. So I try to get students comfortable talking about things that are difficult, controversial, difficult texts. Um, in the online asynchronous, I'm still working on that teaching philosophy. I do try um, to give you everything I've got. I mean, when I teach an online asynchronous class, I prepare fresh content every week for my students. I don't put up recordings and lectures that were old, even though I could. And Robin is always telling me, you should, don't be an idiot. And she is right. But I also think you deserve fresh content. And I like to think about what you're saying in discussion forums when I'm creating your content. I like to mention you by name. So I like to say, if you go and look at what Elise said or what Connor said last week, and I think you deserve fresh content. So I produce kind of like a glorified podcast, glorified in the sense that I have visual accompaniments with my voice. Not as good of a podcaster as Connor. He's a good podcaster, Connor Kelly in your class. And then it goes on to the discussion forum, and I give you about a week to deal with the content, and I interact with you there. And I don't know, it works. I think I have to. It's based on the basic pedagogy that I bring in the classroom. It works. It's labor intensive. It can be improved. I am happy to take your recommendations if you take my classes.
All right. Other than the subject matter, what do you want your students to leave your classroom with? So, what besides the topics covered would you like them to internalize?
Well, uh, I would like my students to ideally develop what I call theoretical literacy, um, especially my graduate students. When I start to see theoretical literacy developing in a classroom, um, online or on campus, I feel like it's really a great achievement. What I mean by theoretical literacy is you become conversant in different theories. You're able to apply theories and concepts across different readings and to different concrete examples, historical and current. And it's usually around this time of the semester, October and then November, I'll start to see some people doing that. They'll be writing about, uh, you know, uh, Oscar Nett and Alexander Kluge, and they'll be connecting it back with C. Wright Mills and Hannah Arendt. And I'm just like, wow, this person's got the material in their back pocket. And what that means is when you leave the class, you can you have the literacy with which to make use of what you've learned. Not all of it, but you can take some of it into conversations and you can put it to work when you're talking to people about politics, when you're teaching your own. I mean, a number of you are teachers, and you can make use of it in political conversations. Beyond that, theoretical literacy, I want people to um, leave my classes with an understanding of where concepts that circulate in political discourse without definition finally can be understood what they mean. In other words, if you're a political science student, there's a good chance that you have spent a lot of time talking about democracy and freedom and capitalism and socialism. There's a good chance you spend a lot of time talking about a lot of things that you take for granted. Where do these concepts come from? What was what were the originary ideas of classical conservatism? What is the historical origins of political liberalism? How has it morphed? What is the difference between classical liberalism and neoliberalism? So I want students to go and have the conversations that they would like to have as students who are interested in politics, but with a better understanding of the historical, conceptual, etymological, and philosophical um, uh, understanding of the concepts they use. So, that's one of the things I aim for, is to send people off with a deeper understanding of the concepts they use. Finally, I would say, I mean, and this is a long answer, I guess, but I like to give students a sense of the history of ideas. And when I say the history of ideas, there's not only one history of ideas. There are different trajectories. There's Eurocentric canonical history of ideas. There's a much more global post-colonial approach to the history of ideas. But what I mean is, like, how did political thinking evolve over time in one place or another? And how is it related to real historical events? And that is one of the things that I really want to send you off with. I just think you'll feel good about yourselves. And I think that it will just improve the depth and the quality of the political conversations you have in other classes and also outside of the university.
All right. So please tell us something about your scholarly interests and especially what you're working on lately.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, I didn't know this when I was in grad school. My uh, my main passionate commitment was to teach. The idea that I could go to work every day and talk to people about things that I think are incredibly important and fascinating was the main engine that drove me through grad school. But after I finished grad school, I realized that I actually liked something more than teaching. I liked writing and reading, and I liked studying things that I don't know a lot about, so that I want to know more about. Um, so it took me some years to develop what I would consider a voice. People say someone comes to voice, and as a writer, it took me a while. But in terms of the research and the scholarship, you can just you can Google my last name. There's only one person well, there's a few people in my family who have it. But if you look up my very strange name, you'll find my articles and my books. Currently, I've got two books that are finished. One of them is I have the page proofs for it, and it's copy edited page proofs and all that stuff. It's called Imaginary Power, Real Horizons. And that book is a book about the way that the imaginations of people have made their way into historical struggles and ultimately into political realities. So, for example, that book deals with how is freedom conceptualized in slave revolts, and how does the imagination of the slave um, become a part of concrete political struggles in history. So there's a chapter on W.E.B. Du Bois, and I've got a chapter on Black radical music and social movements of different kinds, where I'm looking at the way that political imagination doesn't stay inside of the heads of people, but the subtitle of that book is The Practicality of Utopianism. And if pushing back a little bit on the common saying, that may be true in theory, but it isn't true in practice. Everybody has heard that saying, that may be true in theory, but it isn't true in practice. And us theorists, I mean, Immanuel Kant wrote an essay about this. We hate that saying. Like, if somebody jumps off a building and plummets to their death, and it's not just the bad practice. There's also something wrong with the ideas. And then the other book is a co-authored book with an Italian philosopher, Bruno Rulli, called Communist Ontologies, which is an exploration of the ontological readings of Marx's philosophy. By ontological readings of Marx, what Bruno and I are looking at is the readings of Marx and Marx's ideas as being more about forms of life than forms of government. In other words, what Marx was talking about was not communism as a form of government, but communism as a form of life. There's a lot of people who are dealing with ontological readings of Marx, and so Bruno and I undertook a project with that name, Communist Ontologies. And they'll both be out in 2024.
You're amazing. So this is kind of a big question. What would an MA exam or thesis look like under your supervision?
Well, if you get interested in philosophy, political philosophy, I guess after tonight, if I see some of you in a class in the spring, maybe it works. But if you get interested in political philosophy, an MA, you'll do an exam or a thesis. I strongly encourage people to do exams because people get oftentimes stuck writing a thesis. And the only people I really encourage to do a thesis are people whose idea is screaming out that this ought to be a thesis. They have a very particular, very specific application of some theory to something happening in the world, and they want to see it through, and they just want to focus on that. How does Kant's cosmopolitanism relate to ecological catastrophe in the world right now? And that's it. And that's the question, their research question, and that's the only thing they want to focus on because they aren't interested in anything else. But if you don't have some kind of a burning question, an MA exam is the way to go. Even if you do have a burning question, you might want to think about an exam. And then you would look at subfields in political philosophy. It's like, for example, sometimes the student will say, I'm really interested in feminist theory, or I'm really interested in post-colonial theory, or I'm really interested in critical theory, or I'm really interested in ancient philosophy. I want to do a question on, Plato and Aristotle. Yes, that has happened. And that you can do that. And what it looks like to do a thesis or an exam in political philosophy, one thing with philosophers is we are not like other political scientists, political theorists in many regards. One of the things is we are not impressed by 10-page long bibliographies. So political theorists are very comfortable with writing 20 pages on half of a chapter in Marx's Grundrisse, because we understand that people have written books on parts of the Republic of Plato. You know what I'm saying? If you look at Martha Nussbaum, great philosopher up in Chicago, I mean, she writes book after book after book on Aristotle. I mean, it's one section of the physics. So you do a kind of a close reading usually in political philosophy. It's a lot of what you do is what we call exegesis, where you're explicating, sometimes the phrase is unpacking the meaning of dense theoretical text. It maybe doesn't sound very fun the way I'm saying it, and I probably can say that in a more fun way, but it's too late. Um, but it is fun and it is rewarding, because what happens is there are things that confound you, but you think that they're important for some reason. There are things that confound you, but you're drawn to them for some reason. Maybe you don't know why. And you work on them. And it's very rewarding when you realize that not only do you understand what these authors are up to, but you have a point of view and you have found some things. And really, at the graduate level, what always will encourage you to do is to try to find some things that haven't been done, not major, giant, life changing, world historical discoveries. But, in academia, sometimes there's something that a philosopher misses, or there's an application they couldn't make because they died before they had a chance to see what you're looking at. And you can extend the theory and apply it to an analysis of something beyond the scope of what the author themselves did. That is a closure. That is graduate work. That is awesome. I would help you do it happily. I don't know if that's good enough, John, but is it?
That is, and we might take up a few things about that later on.
Okay.
And then there's one, I think since it's right on target. Virgil asked in chat, would you recommend the thesis option for someone looking to do a PhD in the future?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking over there. Thanks, John.
You don't have to.
Oh, great. That'd be great.
Keep going.
I appreciate that. Well, if you're going for direct admittance to a PhD program that doesn't require that you matriculate through or that you go through their own thing, it helps to have a strong writing sample, and some students don't have one. And then if you really have, I would say, Virgil, that the answer is really no. Unless you really don't have one, and you have a really good idea for a thesis. The problem with a thesis, Virgil, is that a lot of people want to write one, but they don't have an idea for one, which is fine. You don't have to have an idea for a thesis, because we'll let you confer your degree with a exam closure. But if you have one, and you are really committed to going on for a PhD, and you don't have a seminar paper that's just kick-ass good, then yeah, that could help, because you can take a section of a master's thesis, you can polish it up and put it in an application. The reality is, if you write a master's thesis, it'll probably be the best piece of writing that you do in the program. So sometimes I have that conversation with students, but it's not just a question of doing it for the PhD. It's a question of having something that you have a really strong, passionate interest in for a thesis. A lot of students sometimes will stretch for something, and I'll try to sort of back them off that a little bit, because again, sometimes students get stuck. You get a thesis idea, you have a research bibliography, and you have to do a rough draft. You can't just defend the first draft. Good writing is always the product of revisions, always, in all fields of academia. So I'll wait and wait and wait, and no rough draft comes in. So I think, the exam is a little bit more of a surefire way to get through, in that instead of a rough draft of a thesis should look like a journal article in political philosophy, and not too long, not 80 or 100 pages. It's not a dissertation. It's not modeled on a book monograph. It's modeled on, I would look at some journal articles in political theory. So, 25 to 35 pages. Doesn't have to be so strict, but but when you're doing an exam, you have a research bibliography too. But instead of a draft, you do, I mean, you could do a literature review. I usually have students do an annotated bibliography in sort of the place of a literature review. And if the annotated bibliography is good, then it reassures me that the student's prepared to take the exam. It's much easier to write an annotated bibliography of 15 to 20 articles, books, than it is to write a draft of a 30-page scholarly article. Too long. That was too long.
No, that was good. It was good. And I just, one of the things that we've been saying, so we're doing our best to prepare people for closures.
Great.
But we've been saying all along, and it gives make you remind me to say it, that what you actually do is worked out with you and your chair. So I mean, we're doing our best to kind of give guidelines, but don't, if you really have a there's variation, and that's okay. All right, last question of the interview.
Yes.
Recalling your experiences as a graduate student, what advice would you give to our MA students?
Well, I always give sort of the same advice, which is that you know, you have 501, which you're in now. You've got 502. Some students have to take 451, empirical political analysis, and then you have closure, and everything else is an elective. Right? So really, for most students, it's 501, 502, and the closure at the end. And I really want to encourage you to feed your appetites. With those electives, nurture your passionate interests. And, you know, in academia and graduate school, you don't ever want to be dragging a corpse across the finish line. I mean, it's really great when you're graduate students, you probably do have some passionate interests. You don't have to study everything in all the subfields. It kind of works like I mean, it's like you know, how academia works is everyone's a generalist at the lowest level, then you develop mastery in some area. That's the idea of the masters. And then if you go on for a PhD, you become like, you know, somebody who has a highly esoteric, so oftentimes you're really focused in on something so narrow. But at the master's level, you are still in a somewhat of a more exploratory phase, and you should follow your interests. And what I would recommend is if you should be trying to take 500 level courses, but if there's a 400 level course and the topic and the title are just so exciting, take it. And if you need to, you know, petition for that to count, go for it, because you can't always do things that you love to do, that you're just driven toward, or you're drawn to, and you have passionate interest in. So for as long as you have that opportunity, take it. You know, and you not to say that don't try different classes, but if there's a class that you're really interested in taking, take it, because also at UIS, like if you say, I'll take it next time, you may graduate before it's offered again, right? So most of the graduate courses I teach are offered once every 2 years, right? So you say, oh, that course in women from margins of philosophy sounds great, but I don't want to take it this time. Well, you probably won't take it then, period. And that's also true for a lot of the 500 level graduate seminars in comparative politics and international relations and American politics and across the other subfields. So if there's something that looks good, go for it. Get it while the getting's good.